welcome. I see our attendees have started to sign in. While we allow for a moment for everyone to get on board, I'm going to ask those of you online, if you would like to make use of the chat function, just pop us a message to let us know who you are and where you are signing in from today. We will begin in a moment. We're just allowing the rest of the participants to sign in. I see our very first person, Juanita from the Eastern Cape, Andre from Cape Town, welcome. Thank you for signing in today. Buyo from Johannesburg. We have Leon that says, hi everyone, a very warm welcome, and this is a very exciting engagement. Absolutely. We have Donald from Pretoria, Lizette from Rudaport, Teresa from Pretoria. Welcome everyone. We are just allowing a short moment for the rest of the attendees to sign on. We have Leon from UNISA in Pretoria. Busi from Pretoria as well. Welcome everybody. I think we are ready to begin. So with that being said, I am Natasha Maraj, the membership manager at Golden Keys, Southern Africa. And I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for signing in today. It is my honor to actually be part of this webinar series, and I will be introducing our MC for today, who is Edith Maziofa Tapfuma. Edith is a seasoned senior development social scientist and strategist with organizational track record, working in international organizations in Southern Africa and international. Edith is currently leading the managing consultant for Vitality Wellness in Zimbabwe, and previously co-authored a book entitled Tales of Womanhood, compelling stories of resilience in women's empowerment. Edith is an expert in promoting private sector sustainability, decent work, and diversity management. Edith has a strong background promoting women's economic empowerment, managing HIV and AIDS, wellness, advocacy, and policy processes, poverty reduction strategies, and gender programming for private sector, CSOs, FBOs, media, youth, and women's organizations. Edith is a social entrepreneur with interests in empowering women and girls. Edith is also board chairperson for Safe Haven Zimbabwe, an organization committed to supporting the learning needs of children with autism and providing a parent support network. Edith is a travel enthusiast and loves cooking for her family. Favorite saying, and I hope to pronounce this correct, Nyasha Ngadziwande, and the Shona meaning, may grace abound. Edith lives with her husband and 3 children in Harare, Zimbabwe. Over to you, Edith.
Thank you, Natasha, and good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to our day 2 of the GBV series. Today, we are looking at understanding gender-based violence in the context of conflict and violence. And I will just introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker will be Mr. Leon Roots, who is program convener of the postgraduate program for social and behavior studies, including HIV and AIDS within the Department of Sociology in UNISA. He's also the program manager of the Tirusano Collaborative Projects, focusing on the advocacy of diversity, equity, belonging and inclusion in communities, curriculum, and workplaces. Currently, he is the convener of the university's Employee Health and Wellness Working Group and has been involved in this field in various sectors over years, including the development of workplace policy and program frameworks. His MA focused on pathways to manhood, while he is currently working on his PhD, which will present some guidelines on how to implement male-friendly employee health and wellness workplace programs. He has also served as chairman of SAfAids, South Africa between 2015 and 2020 and provided strategic advice and support to different organizations in both the public and private sector on HIV, health, and wellness. Our second speaker this afternoon is Pastor Juanita Kapp, who is an ordained minister in the Full Gospel Church. Juanita has been a full-time minister for the past 14 years, and she is a CPSE Level 5 religious professional. Juanita holds a master's degree in theology, specifically dogmatics, at Northwestern University. In 2017, she was awarded the NW Lenti de Lange Trophy for Best Ethics Student by the Faculty of Theology. She is currently serving as the Vice President of the Golden Key International Honor Society Alumni Committee in the Eastern Cape. Her hobbies include doing karate, mixed martial arts, singing, songwriting, and doing research. Her passion is to help individuals achieve their goals, and she loves being involved in community upliftment. Juanita's motto in life is never give up. Our third speaker is Teresa Kanyami. Teresa is an MPH candidate, currently working as program officer at SAfAids. Teresa is a human rights advocate and facilitator. Teresa is also a peer educator focusing on sexual and reproductive health rights. Teresa has 5 years of experience in the advocacy and peer educating fields. Those are our speakers for this afternoon, and I'll hand right over to Mr. Leon Roots to give us his first reflections and presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you so much for our introduction. It's my privilege to introduce one of our esteemed leaders within the University of South Africa, Dr. Genevieve James. She is the Director of Community Engagement, and I am very privileged to work with her because really, colleagues, I can share with you, she's a very motivated person, a person that is really also passionate about communities and community work. She holds a degree, if I'm not mistaken, in doctoral was in theology, and she's very much involved in that field, but specifically from a community perspective and looking at how does we use communities to actually deal with situations like social issues like gender-based violence. But she's also a person in the university that really has very strong leadership, and it's been challenging for us as universities now to do our community engagement online, but because of many ways of dealing with it, we have been following her kind of direction, and it's actually going very well with us even doing our community engagement online. And that is the third mandate of us as universities, to engage on platforms like this, to also do community engagement through that, to ensure the university is actually coming closer to the community, but the community is also coming closer to the university. So I'm handing over to Dr. James to please do a bit of a word of welcoming on behalf of UNISA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leon, and thank you so much to Golden Key and all the colleagues who are joining us from around the country and all the networks. It's really such a joy when we in higher education can connect with civil society and communities of faith. Communities of faith have always been at the forefront of development at community level, at the cellular level. And even when there've been very, very high levels of political tensions, which cause so much of distresses in communities, it is the communities of faith that have stood across the country and held hands and worked towards addressing the deep divisions and distresses of many communities. So we applaud the faith community for their work and for standing in the gap. We know there's a great deal of knowledge mobilization that needs to happen between faith communities and researchers and higher education for us to really develop enriched capacity building exercises and share knowledge between ourselves, because learning from the faith community who has stood and weathered all storms, at organizational level, at community level, there's a great deal of insight to share. So I want to welcome you all on behalf of the University of South Africa. As you are aware, the University of South Africa is the largest university on the continent and is one of the largest universities around the world. But this size has to matter. It means for us reach. It means for us friends and connections and robust links across the higher education sector, the faith sector, the civil society sector, government, business, and communities in urban and rural areas. And so it is a tremendous joy to see these partnerships such as Teresano and Golden Key in effort. And I really want to applaud this knowledge mobilization that you have prepared on the issues of gender violence and all the discussions and the discourses that are happening over all of these days. I've looked at the content. It is rich. It is timely. And it will nourish our souls for those of us who feel that we've been working alone and isolated in pockets. So right at the outset, I want to say that we have had a really painful couple of years. I just want to check with you whether you can see my screen. I'm
not
just
yet,
checking it.
Okay. Not yet.
Let's see right now.
There we go.
Yes.
Fantastic. So we've had a painful 2 years. I mean, prior to that, we were already in pain. The gender violence pandemic was already raging and waging its war in the nation. And so then we had COVID, and then it puts us into the most distressing condition of disorientation, which we have yet to come out of, and it will take years for us to build and to work. So COVID-19 is just showing us what's been there all along, but it is deepening and being exacerbated by this pandemic. So the crisis of gender violence, we have had summits, we have had days of activism, we've had marketing campaigns, we've had prayer sessions, we've had marches, but the news continues. We are a deeply broken and distressed society, and we have huge challenges with gender discrimination and gender injustice across the land. And so in a country where, for example, our femicide rate is 5.1 times higher than the global average, there's something wrong here. Something is wrong here. This is a nation that overwhelmingly identifies itself as a nation of faith. This is a nation where the people are very religious, very faithful. There is high affiliation to the Pentecostal charismatic movement. It's the overwhelming affiliation in the land. So why is it that amidst this scenario, we still have a nation of gender violence and such hatred when it comes to gender and gender identity? That, in my mind, doesn't quite make sense. Why is it that our faith is failing to transform and change our ways of thinking and our ways of seeing each other and our ways of seeing each other's identity? And so something is amiss here. There is a disconnect between our faith and our lived realities. And we see these disconnects throughout. And so these important engagements, the ones that are happening today and the ones that are happening throughout the course of these weeks with Teresa and Golden Key, these are critical, because coming together, you will be able to give voice to the uncomfortable questions that contemporary society seeks to avoid. Now, I mentioned the Pentecostal charismatic movement in particular, because that was the area of a large portion of my PhD studies. But I can tell you the challenge of gender-based violence goes across all religious denominations and across all religious affiliations in the country. And so we have to start asking, what kind of faith do we possess? Why does this faith not have any impact on our character? Why does this faith not have any impact on the lived realities of our nation, the safety of our people, and how livable our communities and societies are? And so once more, we are called upon to imagine a different world. That's what people of faith do. That's what researchers do. That's what scholars do. We always imagine an alternate world, a world where there is beauty, a world where there is safety, a world where we are embraced and included. Because I like what this one philosopher says: it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So there are various aspects of our society that are in deep dysfunction and in deep pathological mode. And so we do not conform to this. No, we are always renewing our minds. We are always thinking, how do we set ourselves apart to be a witness for a better world, to be a witness for the love of God, to be a witness for the embrace of God. And so these are different things that we apply our minds to. For us in higher education, we know that our mission was founded first and foremost on a civic mission. And we call upon our academics, we call upon our facilitators, we call upon all those linked to us to say, let's mobilize our skills and resources in the direction of the challenges of the world. But at the same time, we also do not believe we know everything. We do not believe we know it all. And so we reach out our hands to our partners in government, in business, in civil society, and in the faith community to learn, to help us deepen our own understanding on the problems of our society, so that we can then in turn develop curriculum that is relevant and research that meets society's needs. And so, friends, our vision at UNISA is that we are the African universities shaping futures in service of humanity. But these futures that we are shaping are not just the futures of our students. We want to join hands with our civil society and our faith networks across the land to say, where are the problems that we experience together as a nation? How do we work together as a nation? Where have we failed in higher education? How can we do better by society? And we join our hands together to determine and shape the futures of legislation, of policy, of how we develop communities and settlements so that it can be livable and that it can be communities of justice where there would be no discrimination. It would be communities that will resemble communities that are blessed communities, communities of life, not of death. And so we join hands with you, Golden Key, and all our partners, and work towards this journey of development, because we know this state of dependence and entitlement for many, many women, that would mean not being able to leave a violent relationship because of economic dependence. So our work also deals with the issues of economic justice and its impact on gender. We at UNISA know that we cannot just push students through a higher education system. There are profound implications on the success of the students' throughput and passing through the system. And those socioeconomics and the conditions that our students live in impact on them greatly. And so for us, our partners are vital in learning about our conditions, learning about the situations that our students live in. We work with you, Golden Key, and that's why I'm so excited about this Teresano Golden Key partnership, because you are speaking to the needs of the white paper. The white paper says that there is too little support for community education. We must find ways to cater to the needs of millions of adults and youth that are not getting access to employment or training. The white paper also says that communities have learning needs that have not been adequately catered for by the public education and training institutions. So what Teresano and Golden Key is doing is highlighting key societal issues in a collaborative manner, highlighting those areas, meeting the needs of the learning needs of our society. And so I applaud you for this partnership. You are addressing a very critical development area that impacts on the lives of all South Africans, and you are doing so in a collaborative manner, and at the same time you are meeting the critical needs of the white paper. And so in this session, you are mobilizing knowledge, and I want to applaud you and celebrate you, because knowledge is power. And when knowledge is held back, when knowledge is hoarded, when knowledge is imprisoned, it can have devastating impacts for communities. And so with the knowledge divide, you will have people living in situations where they cannot find, manage, and access knowledge, and they will be kept in a state of despair. And so through these knowledge mobilization sessions, where we're mobilizing knowledge from the faith community, from Golden Key, from Teresano, and we are sharing and learning from each other, we will see that those gaps in the knowledge divide, we can start to deal with and mobilize knowledge on gender justice issues. We work for social justice. We want the creation of just systems at all levels. There must not be injustice in any systemic level. There cannot be a lack of access to key information on gender justice issues and understanding on gender identities and how we embrace each other as society. And so this information is linked to social justice and the principles of social justice. And so I celebrate this partnership as you join together. Thank you for working together. Through these seminars and sessions, I believe that individual agency will be, people will be individually capacitated. Individually, they'll have the strength to act. And then they will also be able to act on others' behalf, those such as babies and children who are at the receiving end of gender violence. And then you will also be able to Teresano, Golden Key, UNISA, all of us can come together and mount a collective agency on the key issues that society is grappling with regards to gender. And so I'm going to leave it here. There's this word transformation. We talk about it all the time. Transformation. We want transformation. We want transformation. But transformation is just merely a marked change in form or nature or appearance. Transfiguration, and I'm bringing in this to the faith community, transfiguration is something on another level. Transfiguration, a complete change of form or appearance into something more beautiful and just. This is a blessed place. There's beauty, there's justice, there's warmth, there's healing, there's nourishment. Transmogrification is on the flip side of that. It is a society that is being altered with grotesque effects. A society that is becoming uglier, more malicious, more malevolent by the moment. And so I want to say together that I celebrate this partnership. I want to thank you all. from Golden Key, from the Full Gospel Church, from the faith networks that are participating today, from Tirisano and all its associated projects at UNISA. Thank you for your efforts. And I pray that working together, you will see transfiguration of lives, of people, of policy, and of places. Thank you, Chair.
Edith?
Thank you, Dr. James, for that passionate delivery of your presentation. And now I hand over to Mr. Leon Roots to take us through to the next presentation. To Leon.
We can see your screen, Leon, but you're muted.
Sorry, colleagues, running around trying to find the mute button as its own challenge. Okay. I think Dr. James have really set the tone that it is within our own hands to really make the difference. And we can only do it as becoming agents of change and as a collectiveness. So I want to take a bit of a step back when we want to understand a bit maybe what is going on around gender-based violence and try to find some answers. So I want us to step back to look at what is happening in the world when it comes to conflict violence. So we will then understand that conflict, so let me just get, conflict. So conflict is a confrontation of powers. It happens at a personal level, it happens with relationships, it happens with communities, it happens with groups. And the idea is that there is a level of intention to harm, to hurt, and even to destroy behind that. That conflict is in many spaces, even sometimes even manipulative, coercive, and even physical. But it's also a whole thing that it leads to negative impact. Conflict sometimes also lead to positive impact, that it forces change. Like in this case, the social conflict is forcing us to reevaluate our life and to rethink our life and to change. But in most cases, social conflict leads to inequality, it leads to violence, and it leads to spaces of disruption. What is violence then? Violence is definitely the intent to use this power and to actually use it against somebody, a group of people, a society, a community, a state. But it becomes then this tension between power and control. And that plays out in then violent spaces, because violence is also a way of manifestate itself in a physical force. It could be also a psychological manipulation, but it could also be a cohesion, where you coerce somebody in a space against their will. And there's always an element that there is again intent to harm, to damage, and to destroy. And that makes that we need to ask ourselves in this space, how do we use this space to understand violence, and how do we collectively look at it? So it's very important that when we look at types and the nature of violence in our communities, we have to look at it that sometimes it's self-directed, that sometimes we actually inflict violence on ourselves with body harm, with even extreme cases of suicide, with cutting, with spaces that we isolate ourselves as a way of punishing. Then it can be between people, where the violence becomes intense and specifically much more psychological or emotional, beyond the physical, that it happens. And it often plays in a space that this interpersonal is so intense, because it often starts with people that we love. And that's why we see such a high percentage of femicide happening with intimate partner violence. But it can also be collective, where we see the intent of people to actually do violence in a form of protest, in a form of marches, in a form of social economical destruction, like we saw a few weeks ago, the looting that happened. But we see then what happens is that people are feeling frustrated because they cannot feel that they are heard, they are seen, and that people is doing something on this space. So it can be physical, that we can see that physical harm like crime, murder, assault could happen. It could be sexual violence, like our topic is about gender-based violence, but it's also about human trafficking. We have a lot of movement of people across Africa, and South Africa is recognized as one of the 4 major hotspots for human trafficking, including children trafficking and body part trafficking, and also even drug trafficking. Then there's a lot of psychological violence around us, where we find like bullying, cyberbullying, harassment. We find people stalking each other, verbally abuse each other, either in public places or by humiliating a person, or even now online, when we see these kind of psychological violence happening. Then there's a lot of neglect happening, neglect of the self, neglecting of the loved one, neglecting of children, malnutrition, not taking care of your body, not eating well. We see even neglect and harm towards elderly in our society that is happening, that there's a significant number of elder people being killed over the last 2 years, which we do not talk about what lies behind it. But there's a thin line between violence and abuse, and they often go hand in hand. The dimensions of violence is intersectional. And intersectional means that they cross-cut with race, age, gender, sex, sexual orientation, family structures, cognitive abilities, relationships, educational levels, where people are geographically located, what kind of culture they have, faith, class, language. So there's no clear-cut profile, as Professor Mazubuko in our first session indicated, of how does a typical victim or perpetrator of gender-based violence look like. And the same thing is here, but we see a significant level of violence amongst our young people, that there is a high increase of gangsterist behavior, crime-related behavior, but also specifically related to gender-based violence. The highest level of gender-based violence is between 20 and 35, mostly against young women, but we also see it in the LGBTI community, and we even see it men to men, where that kind of violence is happening either through fights or emotional abuse or humiliation. So we cannot analyze it only from one angle. We need to see how does it intersect with all these other dimensions. So the thin line between violence and crime is really problematic. When does violence become a crime, and when does crime become a violence? And I think that's the question which we asked when we looked at what happened in the looting, in the protest spaces. Because in all those spaces, there is a criminal action, but there is with it, it's camouflage with violence. And sometimes they go hand in hand, that you cannot separate the one without the other. because in every space there's somebody opportunistic to actually harm the other. So gender-based violence, as we see from the European Union, a global picture, that 1 out of 3 women have experienced some kind of physical or sexual violence. And they are often in violent spaces, raised in violent families, in communities, in societies. But also 1 of 2 women have experienced sexual harassment, specifically in workplaces and in places of like the church even, where these things are rising. We see 1 out of 20 women in the world have been raped. In South Africa, it's 1 out of 8 women who have been raped. And that, colleagues, as Dr. James has said, how can it be if we are such a faith-bearing society and community? Then 1 out of 5 women have experienced some kind of stalking. And stalking is not always physical, it's even on the cyberspace when it comes to social media. 95% of people who have been trafficked are women. And gender-based violence in the context of conflict and violence comes in many forms. It even comes in spaces where we see Peace Corps are going to countries and there's an increase of rape. There's an increase of gender-based violence by the people who comes, who's supposed to uphold or restore the peace. We see during civil war that there's a distortion of kidnapping, specifically young girls, like in Nigeria, that is still happening now. We see the first kind of violence that happens in sometimes this political unrest is to target women and to abuse them and even to kill them as a form of dominance. And we must also then take cognizance that there is so many risk factors that it starts at the individual level, that some biological characteristics could contribute to make the person more violent than the next one. But in most cases, violence is socialized. And I like what our previous President Mandela said, nobody is born a racist. They learn how to become racist. And this is the same in many ways. We learn to become violent. We learn to respond to conflict through violence. And we do it through our relationships, and we do it through our communities, and we do it through our societies, which is very violent at this stage, because we don't teach what is the alternative of violence to our young ones, to our children, and even to ourselves. If we are in conflict with somebody, how can we resolve it without getting violent? How can we do it as a country, as a nation, to become non-violent spaces? So how do we do that? The center point is the community. The community is the spur to really change the cycle of conflict, violence, and gender-based violence. We can do certain things at individual level, looking at self-esteem, building defense mechanisms, and raise different gender roles that are against it. But ultimately, it has to do with our relationship with each other in a community. And we need to bring back the community care. Some people call it Ubuntu. Some people call it the humanity of Africa. We need to bring it back so that we can change our society. But our legislation, our justice system must also be geared to become more proactive than rather reactive, like we are currently, that we are actually responding to the problem rather than solving it and ultimately prevent it. But that means, as Dr. James said, it starts with us becoming agents and be the voice of the voiceless and create a movement of change. And that means every one of us cannot stand on the sideline anymore and say it's nothing to do with us. It is about us, and it is about us to change this picture. Thank you, Edith.
For that presentation and unpacking the types and nature of violence and how the communities can begin to respond to violence in communities. I would now like to call upon Teresa, who is our final speaker for this session. Over to you, Teresa. The last I saw Teresa, she was connecting from the airport. Teresa?
Edith, Teresa is not online at the moment. I'll proceed with my presentation and then we'll give her a chance to come back if that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Juanita. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, attendees. As we give Teresa a chance to log back in from the airport, I know she, as Edith mentioned, she has been logging in from there. Let us proceed. Today is a very significant day, and I think every single session that we are going to conduct is going to be a significant session in the transformation of our society. And I do want to echo the words of the presenters today and the people who have greeted us, the MCs, that this is in fact a fantastic collaboration between all the parties involved. It is an active move. It is a step towards the right direction to get awareness out there and to plan and to rephrase and restructure the concepts in our society so that we can make a positive difference, because gender-based violence is a very big problem. Now, there's a million things I can say about gender-based violence, especially because I've been in the ministry for so many years. But the first comment I want to make is approximately 2,700 women have passed away since the year 2000 because of gender-based violence. And if we put that into perspective for ourselves today, we realize that that means there's 2,700 approximate households that now have to function without mothers. And that is just horrific. Gender-based violence has been around forever. It's not a recent phenomenon. It's not something new on the scene of society. It's been around for a long time. We even have many examples in the Bible of GBV. And today in our contemporary time, I would say that it has reached its peak. And this is what we want to work against. We don't want it to multiply and manifest itself even more. We want to enlarge the footprint of peace and love and care in society. We want the community to stand together and the faith community to work together. And I'm so happy that the previous speakers also mentioned this. It has become, gender-based violence has become one of the societal evils that have stuck around, unfortunately. It's a phenomenon that has festered, not only subconsciously, but openly these days. The cases have increased. Women have been maimed. Children have been murdered and victimized. Their dignity has been stripped from them. Often, and I know gender-based violence cuts both ways. I know there are women who also engage in gender-based violence against men. But often, I know women are not treated like human beings at all because they are seen as inferior. Gender-based violence sprouts from violence. It is a type and a form of violence that we have to learn more about. Other forms of violence is physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence, psychological violence, spiritual violence even, cultural violence, verbal abuse is right up there, and even financial abuse. I've seen many cases of gender-based violence in my years in the ministry. I've seen how women have been degraded. I've seen how their personalities have been stripped away from them, how their birthright has kind of been buried, how they've been looked down upon. And we've come to a place where we realize that it doesn't matter in which culture we are, it doesn't matter what our religious disposition is, gender-based violence is everywhere. Now, for me, for instance, I'm a Christian. I'm a pastor in the Full Gospel Church, the Pentecostal movement. I believe in God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But when we look at gender-based violence, we see, and it's been mentioned before today, it reaches across all cultures. It reaches across all the religious beliefs and denominations. So the question is, what are we collectively going to do as a society? We collectively agree, yes, gender-based violence is wrong. Of course, the perpetrators would not agree with us. but I'm speaking to those of us who have a heart and a passion for our society, for the well-being of our society, and for the future of humankind. I enjoyed our first session on Monday tremendously. Craig Wilkinson mentioned that women are in fact equal to men, and that many times scriptures are misunderstood and twisted in order to suit a certain viewpoint. Let's call it, from my point of view, a patriarchal viewpoint. And when we pursue this type of viewpoint, when we allow this in our society, subconsciously, it only strengthens the cases of gender-based violence, because suddenly we find that men are not feeling guilty if they treat their wives that way, because they don't perceive their wives as equal. Sometimes they look at their wives or their daughters as servants, and that is explicitly not what the Bible is teaching. Prof. Nokutullah, in the first session, she spoke about the perpetrators, and she asked a very, very important question. She asked, what does a perpetrator of gender-based violence most likely look like? What do they sound like? And her answer was, they are faceless. We cannot say this type of person is more likely to commit gender-based violence, because it reaches across all ages, some age regions more than others, but we find it across all cultures, all denominations, all genders. Gender-based violence is a societal evil. The perpetrators are faceless. And today I want to say, it doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter who I am. The universal principle, it doesn't matter who we are. The universal principle applies to all of us, is the fact that we all have a body, a soul, and a spirit. Doesn't matter in which geographical region we live. We are body, we are soul, we are spirit, we are human beings. We live in a physical body that we need to look after, that we need to practice self-care on. We have a personality. That's what makes me different from all of you, and what makes you different from the rest of us. We have a personality, we have a soul. It's what makes you, you. We have a spirit man living inside of us. Religiously, we know this. Across all denominations, across all the practice of religion and tradition in the religious sector, we have a spirit man living inside of us. That's why we speak of the spirit of Ubuntu as well. And I want to tie session 2 today to session 1, where it was mentioned that Ubuntu is an actual fact in all cultures. We have to, as humankind, not even as different races or even as people living in different countries or different geographical areas or people who have different viewpoints from ours, we have to remember that we are all human. And as a race, as humankind, we need to fight against gender-based violence. We cannot hide from it. We cannot ignore it, because our future depends on it. We are body, we are soul, and we are spirit. Now, in 14 years of ministry, those years how we attempted to counsel people who were affected by gender-based violence has changed in a dramatic format. It has changed dramatically since I started in the ministry up to today. Because in those days, we would attempt to assist someone who had a mental problem or a spiritual problem or needed counseling. We would do it in a pastoral manner. So we would speak to the spirit man of this individual. We'll work with them spiritually with the scriptures. And in our growth over the years, we've realized that some people go to psychologists. They have a mental problem. They have a mental illness or a trial or a tribulation that they go through. They go to the psychologist, and I'm sure we've got some online here today. They receive counseling, they receive that impartation, fantastic. Some of them are placed on antidepressants, and they get better. And then there would be the people that would come to the church for help, but it would be a medical problem. So they would maybe have an imbalance in their brain or a medical issue that they are facing, and they would be directed to the doctor, the medical doctor, and they would receive medicine and they would get better. And then there would be those people who'd need counseling. They had spirit wounds or they had soul wounds, and it was interfering with the rest of their lives. And the pastors would counsel them. And often people would have a victory, but it would be short-lived if they'd go to these 3 different sectors. And then we started adapting the way that we help people, especially coming from gender-based violence, and it's been mentioned earlier today. Professor Brunston, for instance, from the Northwest University, he wrote a paper, I think it was in 2018, about the 3 musketeering approach. And he interestingly mentions there that because we are holistic beings, if someone goes, for instance, through trial or tribulation and they need that assistance, they need guidance, they need help, it doesn't help that we only send them to the psychiatrist or the psychologist, or we only send them to the pastor, or we only send them to the medical doctor. We have to assist this victim because we are dealing with victims. We have to assist them in a holistic manner because they live in a body that is not just a body and not just a soul and not just a spirit. And he had a lovely formulation, and I want to take that principle of the 3 musketeering approach and I want to bring it to GBV and society. We've mentioned it before. We've concluded after our session on Monday that we have to take out the root of gender-based violence. We have to reformulate a new foundation, and that it's going to take time. But how are we going to do this holistically? And what I want to mention today is that we have to look at what's wrong with the female mindset for women who undergo gender-based violence, for women who keep silent about gender-based violence. What is wrong with that mindset? What are we teaching our little girls? Are we reaching out to the women in the church and saying, you matter? You can speak up if you are uncomfortable. You can say something if someone is invading your personal space. Why is it that none of us often realize the violence and the gender-based violence that are happening behind closed doors? Why do we only start to realize almost when it's too late to repair that broken human being who has been abused for so many years, who have so many soul wounds, who have so many spiritual wounds, who have physical wounds and scars left because of what they've been through? Why is that? So we have to address in our series that we do, in our work that we do with people, we have to correct that female mindset. And we have to tell ladies and girls, raise them well and say, you matter. You are equal to men. You have a space in society. You have a birthright. You have dignity. And when they start activating that self-talk to themselves, when they realize how precious they are and how integrated and special they are in society, that is when we will see how women stand up and speak out. Then we have to look at what's wrong with the men and their viewpoint, the men that become the perpetrators. Sometimes they have viewpoints, sometimes they become the perpetrators, sometimes they don't, but they keep silent about it. And we have to break down the preconceptions there are about the male and the female role. But this will only be scratching the surface. We have to go to the place where a person who is practicing gender-based violence in someone is actually viewed as and exposed as exercising control over someone else. It all comes down to controlling someone else, to dictating their behavior, to dictating even their emotions. And I want to say that if we can get to a place where we facilitate a good framework, a good foundation, where we've taught women and girls and young men and men the right way to respect each other as human beings in their various roles, then we can elaborate on the fact that gender-based violence is all about control. And we can teach these people, these lovely human beings, was created in the image of God. We can teach them to take their view from being in control to exercising self-control. Every single time we go through a traumatic experience, we form memories of what we have been through. And I hope that we can get to a place, there's so much more that we can elaborate on here, all the things that are wrong in the churches. I know you've noticed about the pastor in the Eastern Cape that have now been given 3 life sentences after what he's been doing. It just shows us again, as was mentioned in the first presentation, that society is evil. But if we can, through this series, facilitate a new way of looking at gender-based violence, I think we will make a very, very big impact. I just want to see if Teresa is back online. Can I continue, Chair, or is Teresa back online? I just don't want to cut into the time.
Please continue. She looks like she's not available. So
that
you can
must
have
be a technical
more
issue.
time.
Thank you, Chair. We have to reprogram people. Because if we reprogram people, we will reprogram society. So we can take them from a place of control, where they want to control everything and everyone around them, which is unhealthy, to a place where we facilitate them and re-establish them in their own right to decide and discern who they are as human beings, and take them to a place where they realize that self-control is better. The solution starts with me and with you and with our attendees today. Moving from a mindset of wanting to decide for other people and deciding for yourself and say, self-control will be better. Let us respect each other. Let us value each other, because the spiritual health of a person is extremely important. We have to take the perpetrator and we have to break down those building blocks, the evils that they have themselves gone through. They've been marred. They've been hurt. I often say to people, when people react in a violent manner to a situation or to another person, that anger, where does that originate from? Because the anger leads to violence, but where did the anger come from? Anger is pain that has not been dealt with. Our society is experiencing pain, and people are reacting in anger, and therefore they commit violence, various forms of violence, as well as gender-based violence, which is a very, very big problem. As was mentioned by Leon earlier today, our gender-based violence statistics are out of the roof. It's just too high. We are the country with the highest rates of gender-based violence. And as mentioned by Dr. James, why is that? If we have such a strong faith community, where is the people in our society that want to be the history makers? We call upon those history makers to make a difference. We call upon them today to make a stand, to say, I will respect my fellow human being. We have to take the perpetrator, that person in pain, we have to see that we have to have compassion on them, of course, but we have to see that they are ill in a certain manner. They have mental problems, they have anger problems, they have issues that they are dealing with, and we have to rebuild the blocks of their lives so that their life would not be about control, that their lives would be about self-control and love and compassion for others. And that is why we are implementing programs at Golden Key at the head office. We are implementing programs such as the GK mentoring program. And I know that is going to facilitate a whole new move amongst our young people. Because when people start stepping up to the plate to become mentors, pretty soon they have a positive influence on their mentees. And those mentees go out into the world and they have families and friends that they make a difference to. So it all comes to civil society, yes, as mentioned before, our religious institutions. We want to implement these programs. That's why we are having this webinar series. We want to bring awareness. We want all the attendees at the end of this webinar series to say, I've walked away from this, having more knowledge about gender-based violence. And I know if I'm a sufferer of gender-based violence, if I'm a victim, I know how to proceed. Gender-based violence in the context of violence and culture, we have to add that religion, the religious institutions, is the social institutions that can assist our mission to bring harmony and peace and social cohesion, and that is what we want. We see in the world, in Afghanistan, the violence, the Islamic violence that is taking place. We want peace. We want a better society. We want a future. Doesn't really matter which culture we are from today. We all need to realize that gender-based violence is wrong. And I would like to add that gender-based violence is a culture in itself. And I always tell people at the church, you can never have a vision within a vision. If your church has I'm just using that as an example. If you have a vision at your church, you can never have a vision inside a vision. And I kind of feel like I experience that gender-based violence is a vision within our vision as humankind. Because we want as humans to survive. When you walk into a building, your brain has already calculated many things subconsciously that you are not even aware of. It has discerned within the first few seconds if you are in a safe space, if you will be okay in this space, if you are able to move forward or to the side. You take note of these things without even realizing that you are doing this. As humans, we have a drive to survive, and gender-based violence is like creating a evil vision within our vision as a race, and we cannot have that. So without further ado, let us see if Teresa is back online. If not, I will give over to you, Edith, so that you can engage with the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juanita, for that presentation and really just bringing to our focus on how society has normalized GBV in our communities and really spelling out the role of the faith community in support to address a holistic approach in dealing with both survivors and perpetrators of GBV. I will now introduce our panelists for this afternoon, because Teresa is still away. She was traveling, so I'm sure she has now she has boarded her flight, I presume. Our panelists, we have 3 panelists this afternoon. Our first panelist is Craig Wilkinson. Craig is the founder and CEO of Father a Nation, whose mission is to restore and equip men to be great fathers, mentors, and role models. His belief is that if we can heal men, we can heal the world, and has seen thousands of men and their families touched by the work of Father a Nation. To support his work with men in the fight against gender-based violence, Craig has written a book entitled No Excuse for Abuse. And also he has another book on authentic masculinity called The Six-Pack of Champion Virtues. For his work with men in communities, Craig was awarded the CQ Humanitarian Men of the Year Award. He is passionate about the crucial role men and fathers play in the lives of their children and society. As a keynote speaker and facilitator, Craig covers a variety of topics in the areas of authentic masculinity, parenting, GBV, gender, equity, and excellence. Welcome, Craig. Our second panelist is Elizate Leroux. Elizate is a single mother of a daughter. She's a sister, a daughter, and a friend. Elizate is a person living with a disability. She is passionate about students and contributing to the end of GBV in South Africa. Elizate is currently acting Deputy Director in Student Development and has over 26 years working in institutions of higher learning. And she has served as a manager for student governance, manager in transformation, and manage student social development, and acting deputy director in the unit for students with disabilities in UNISA. She is also the UNISA project leader for the Higher Health and Peer Education program. Lisette started her career as a social worker, working at child welfare in Tshwane, specializing in child sexual abuse and family therapy. She was later trained as therapist and a counselor in South Africa to work with pedophiles and sexual offenders, where she did special court report investigations before sentencing. She was part of the investigation team in South Africa that started the special court system for children testifying in court in cases of child sexual abuse and sexual offenses involving children. She has further specialized over the past 20 years in sexual harassment, gender-based violence, and working with students, managing cases, victim impact assessments, and awareness programs in GBV, including survivors and perpetrators. Welcome, Lisette. Our third panelist this afternoon is Professor Nokutullah Mazubuko, who obtained her PhD in sociology with UNISA and also has a master's in social sciences and development studies from UKZN, and an honors in social sciences and development studies and a Bachelor of Arts with combined 18 years working experience in academia. Professor Mazubuko is currently the head of the University of South Africa in the Institute of Gender Studies, housed in the College of Human Sciences. The Institute focuses on major pillars of academia, such as teaching and learning, research, academic citizenship, and community engagement. Professor Mazubuko is the editor-in-chief of the journal Gender Questions, which is accredited by the Department of Higher Education and Training. The journal hosts issues and normal volumes that focus on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research with the aim of advancing gender transformation on the African continent and globally. Apart from publishing scholarly articles in accredited international and national journals, Professor Mazubuko also participates in television and radio interviews in the Pretoria News Facebook lecture and publishes in various newspaper articles. Thank you and welcome to Professor Nokutullah. Okay, I see that Craig hasn't logged in yet, so we will start with the two panelists. I'll ask Professor Nokutullah to respond to the speakers, whether with questions or comments, as I know she indicated that she might have to leave slightly earlier, just maybe after, just after 2 o'clock. So Professor Nokutullah, if you can go ahead.
Thank you, Edith. Yes, I tried to put a post there on the chat for today's webinar. There are certain elements that I am taking from today's webinar when we're looking at conflict violence, that it is a deliberate, it is intention, it is intended. And I looked at, you know, the people who are seemingly the perpetrators of violence, that these are the people who have very poor conflict management skill, whereby then they resort to violence. The previous speaker spoke about the age group 20 to 35, which this is the age group, and the question that was asked is why that within the statistics, this is the very precise age group that experiences violence. And my take on that is these are the the young people who are entering intimate partner relationships. These are your young people who are entering careers, who are entering the workspace, and therefore they are going in there with a certain view of how life is, and based on their own experiences and based on the opportunities that were available to them as well. And there was a session by the previous speakers that violence is learned in different spaces, and I say that it is learned in those spaces because the spaces themselves allow violence to exist. And it is the spaces themselves that also may allow violence not to exist. So that is why we're having these webinars, which intends to be dialogues that we look at solutions, that intends to be dialogues where done in safer spaces. And then I looked at, I always have this view when I think of violence, and I always consider, what I put myself in a situation of a person who in that element can be a victim. And as previous speakers have said, that, a victim or perpetrator is anyone, a man or a woman, can be either of the two. I always picture myself, what is it that I as a person can do in order to protect myself, to prevent being a victim? And the answer to that is each and every one of us in this platform of today, we are vulnerable to any type of violence. And therefore, we need to have one preventing measure or tool for us to always have, and that is when we meet a person for the first time, or when someone that we know of shows you who they are for the first time, you ought to believe them, because they will never change. We are in different spaces, we are human beings, we interact with different individuals. When something is done to you for the first time, believe that there will be the next time. Nothing ends with the first time. And we need to also rely on our intuitions about the people that we meet, either in the work, in family structures, at school, within the church, that when someone makes you feel less of a human being, there is no way that the next time they will be in a position to empower you. So we look at the power that has been mentioned many times here, power and control, that we ought to give power if power has been given to us. You give what you have. So we provide power and empower others because of the power that has been restored by others to us. I appreciate the lessons that we've seen today with Mr. Roots, Dr. Genevieve, and also the last speaker, Pastor Juanita, looking at what can we learn from this. We learn that the society breeds evilness. It brought to our homes, it is brought to our schools, and it is brought to our churches. And that, colleagues and the wonderful audience, is my contribution as a panelist to add into the discussion of today, looking at conflict violence and gender-based violence in the African context. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nokutullah, for your reflections and your additions to addressing conflict and violence in communities. Craig is not here this afternoon. He doesn't seem he has logged on, but I just want to let everybody know that the resources that he uses at Father the Nation are available online. And there's actually 2 courses that you can access online for free through the Father a Nation network on the internet. So if anyone would be interested in following up the work he has done with Father a Nation, it's available for free. There's also a course that's available online that you can access. I will then ask to hear from our second panelist, Elizate, to respond to the presentations, as well as maybe pose questions for the presenters before I open up to the floor.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you to the speakers and the contributions. I think the theme speaks to what needs to happen first in addressing GBV in society, and that is the context in which this occurs. And I was doing a rough calculation while we were sitting here based on data and statistics that we're all aware of, that in the hour and a half that we are sitting here and discussing it and really grappling with it, 180 women was raped and 3 people was murdered as we engage right now. And how that happened is everything of the context in which we operate. And often it's very difficult really to take that in, because if the problem is so big, and you see it often with poverty, we numb our feelings. And that is also part of the problem, because it can overwhelm us as people if we really take in what it is. And this is a violent onslaught on all people in South Africa. A violent onslaught on our communities, a violent onslaught on our institutions, and a violent onslaught on us as individual adults, but mostly children. When in my years that I worked with child sexual abuse and also adult survivors, and specifically I want to move to men, in the work that we did at different universities, and in one group we facilitated 200 male conversations. In UNISA we facilitated with students, men and women groups in all the provinces, discussions. And I can honestly say that in those groups, 99% of both males and females experience child abuse. Violent child abuse. And some of them never had the opportunity, given also the violent society that we lived in and continue to live in, never had the opportunity to deal with that. So when we come to learned behavior, those are often the trademarks that need to change. And I'm so glad and I'm humbled by every contribution we had this far. For Dr. Genevieve, Doctor, I'm always inspired by your contributions. But what if you hone in on 5 things we can do as a society to move from what you call transmorphiguration to transfiguration? What is that that we can focus on. I would really like to hear that. Juanita, you know, faith-based societies is very important in this dealing with. But I want to ask you, the church, and it's tricky, the church is also part of the problem. Because not only in the cases that we hear on television, but why is it that there's such a high level of tolerance that churches can continue, even if it's evident that there's either child sexual abuse in the realm or there's gender-based violence? Why isn't there a deep sense of we can't move on as a faith-based society like it is, and we need to balance compassion on a personal level and an interpersonal level with taking responsibility? I think the taking responsibility on a societal level is our challenge. And what needs to happen with churches and faith-based communities, because there's always a shift of responsibility. We're not like that, it's them. But in a way, we all are one. We all are the body of Christ. And we need the people that can help with this to also call into action the churches and the faith-based communities that continue to sanction sexism and gender-based violence and other forms of violence, which include child abuse, because child abuse is a central part of the change. So I want to know from you, what do you think? And then from Leon, and I'm interested in this, Leon, you spoke about two things: self-violence. We also, when we work with females, we talk about the concept of internalized depression, which is also learned behavior, but it is a reaction to oppression. And there's different forms of it. And often we as women internalize those messages that we less than. And what would you say that is that also, can we equate that to violence on the other hand? Or is there another dimension that we need to look at in resocialization on an internalized oppression level, that we don't get us as people, us as women, locked into a lifetime cycle of abuse? And often that's our experience. It moved from child abuse to young adult abuse, then it moved to older stages in our marriages and our intimate partner violence. Then the other component, Leon, that you mentioned was that often in violent situations like war and other dimensions, they continue to be violence. And I'm grapple with the concept of compounded violence. So if you look at, for instance, the Fees Must Fall campaign, in that there was violence, but that also led to the hashtag movements on rape at Azania House, when a student was raped during a protest. So I just want you to unpack that a bit for us. So those are my three questions, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Lizette, for unpacking the issues, and then for the questions, the further questions to the speakers. We are now 6 minutes left to closing on this session. I would just like the speakers to respond to the questions posed. Maybe we will start with if Leon could respond first, and then if Juanita can take the last half of that question. I was very interested to hear you say more about the church and the position of tolerance on the church on GBV. Especially, I will also comment that in my context in Zimbabwe, we have the apostolic sect, and in the apostolic sector, they account for 35% of all underage marriages. Have we normalized GBV from the church's perspective? So I'll just ask the speakers to quickly respond, and then we can end this session. Thank you. Over to Leon.
Thank you, Edith, and thank you, Elizate, for those very, very valuable contributions. I just think Dr. James have stepped out, but I think the main thing that links to your questions also. Are you here? Oh, sorry, Dr. James.
Yes, I've been here all along. Thank you.
Oh, my apology. Please go ahead and see if you can guide us with what Lizette asked.
Okay, Leon, do you want me to do it now, or shall you go first?
Okay, let me be quick, then I can hand over to you. Colleagues, self-violence is actually not only a physical space, it is also a space of imaging where often we see that we beautify even violence. And we see it like what happened in some cases that very, I don't want to say attractive people, they are in the front pages of newsletter papers, they are on the 8 o'clock news, they are the people. And there is a study when Karabu, I don't know her surname, when she was murdered, because Karabu was a very beautiful girl according to the public, and the public really beautified the whole victimhood around her. And in that process, the same time, there was another young girl killed by her partner too. But this young girl was a bit a big size lady, and she was also somebody that just looked like an average person that will walk past us, and we will not pay even attention if we have to look at the external outlook. And there was a lot of debate about how do we use imaging as a way to also create this kind of internalized bullying processes when we try to match ourselves against these kind of stereotype spaces. And I see a lot of fashion magazines are moving away from it, that they've realized that specifically women, and even for us as men, there's a Men's Health magazine that always show these perfect bodies. And myself not having a perfect body, I feel very much sometimes ashamed going through there. I feel guilt, and I feel sometimes I just want to hide from the world, because at the end, that is what the world sees, and we feel like that's what the world wants. And I think, Lizette, that talks a lot to the issue of when it starts with that internalized process that then go out into self-harm, where people then go into self-harmful practices, where we found people going in spaces of overeating or been even cutting themselves to manage that shame or to manage that hurt that they've experienced. So I do believe that at the end, it is also a psychological thing, and it is connected to that internalized depression that you talk about. When it comes to violence during war, the problem with violence in war or war itself, it's often a space where there is just no kind of order. And in that no order chaos space, you find these kind of violent acts that you talk also about, compound violence. That is when people are reasoning with themselves and justifying their violence based on the bigger cause. That whatever they do, they did it for the bigger cause, and therefore it should not be seen in isolation. And even that case that we know of a student protest and that student who was raped in the hostel, the perpetrator, when they were asking him, why did he do it? He said, no, I did it because I was very unhappy that she was dating and I think another race guy, that you know, and that was just then my way of showing her she must come in line with the rest of us, and then she must join us. She cannot be different from us. And in that space, you found even in these peace corps spaces that people justify rape, or they justify violence against communities to keep them subordinate, to remove power from them, and even to dehumanize them in a way to gain dominance and oppression over them. So those are my two answers. Thank you.
Dr. James?
Okay, colleagues, so the question was, I think it was 5 steps to move from transfiguration to move from transmogrification, a complete, utterly grotesque and ugly situation, to transfiguration, where it is a society of beauty and justice. In answering this, I would like to, since this is primarily a gathering of the faith community, I would like to focus on a text in the book of Jeremiah, and I think this is going to be a very, very important text in answering what would be those 5 steps. So the text that I'm referring to is actually in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 6, verse 16. Jeremiah, chapter 6, verse 16. I believe contained in this text are the steps that as the faith community, we can embark on this journey. So I'm just going to quickly attempt to share that within this remaining minutes that I have, so that we can quickly look into it. Just want to stop sharing. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm not going to waste time with trying to get it right, but I just want to double check if you can see this.
Not yet, Doctor.
Okay. Are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so I just want to make sure that you see this, right? So here's the text from which I hope to provide an answer. So Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. It starts with, "Thus says the Lord, stand, stand." Number 1, stand. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the tried and tested paths where the good way is, and then walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. Sadly, the recipients of this text said, we will not walk in it. So in answering the question, what are the 5 ways? I think number 1 is getting a clue from the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah, as a church leader, or as a man of mission, as a man of ministry, he did not carry his own burdens in terms of building his own personal empire and focusing on statistical gain and all of those things. Jeremiah was focused on what were the things that broke God's heart, the pains of the people, the hurt of the people, and the hurt and pain of the people broke Jeremiah's heart. So number 1, how do we move from transmogrification to transfiguration? Our leadership style. We need to look at our leadership style, the kind of focus that we have in our ministries. What is our ministries focused on? Is it empire building? Is it expansionist strategies? Is it a statistical gain? Or are we focused on the burden of the Lord, the things that have broken God's heart? So number one would be reassessing the kind of leadership we have in the faith community. In fact, this can go across.
Funny you.
Leon?
Just be aware that sometimes your
Okay. Okay.
Please continue, Dr. James. We've got about a minute left.
Okay.
So you're welcome.
And so number one would be the kind of leadership and what we focus on. Number two would be making sure that across our denominations, we are addressing those who are leading the people astray, who are preaching that, preaching division, preaching divide, preaching that women needs to be put in their place. We need to address the wounds of the people adequately. And then we need to be deeply moved by what is going on in our society, not just in word, but really moved to the core of our very spirit. So stand. What does that mean? Stop whatever you're doing. Stop this church business that's been going on for years and the committee meetings where big decisions get made about buildings and who will take leadership over what. Reassess what is it that the church has been sent in the world to do. And that requires stopping the busyness. We don't need busyness. We need a reassessment of what it means to be church. And that means stopping and standing because we are at the crossroads. Then look around you. What are the economic conditions? What are the social conditions? If we are building more and more churches, if we're raising up the people of God, what is the context in which we serve? Where are the pains in this context? Number three, ask for the tried and tested parts. Ask for what does it mean to have masculinities that build and heal and restore? What does it mean to have leaders that build and heal and restore and not just about surplus acquisition and power? Ask for the good way. Go back to the scriptures. Go back to men and women across history. Ask for what is the good way. And then finally, once we have applied our minds to what is the good way in the economy, what is the good way in education, what is the good way in the socioeconomics, in the well-being of the nation, walk in it, communicate the message, and get people to walk in it. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. James. And to wrap up, ask Juanita to just give us a quick response. We're already over time.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair. It was a lovely session and we've learned so much from this session, and I'm looking forward to our sessions that are still coming. I know that we are going to have a lovely unpacking of what gender-based violence is, and that we will learn more and more how to address it and how to, in actual fact, stop it. I would like to respond to Lizette. Lizette, you have a very valid question, and I'm going to answer you in less than a minute because we are pressed for time and we are going to wrap up now. We are living in a very controversial time in history. I would like to answer your question by firstly stating that sometimes we forget that we live in a broken world. We forget that we live in a world with broken systems. We forget that we live in a world with broken preconceptions of what the truth really is. What is one truth for one person is not necessarily the truth for someone else. As humankind collectively, we have to look out for each other, and we have to make sure that all people who are subjected to the onslaught and the trials and the tribulations of our broken world are ministered to. And what I've found in the past 14 years in the ministry is that, sometimes pastors, and it's very wrong, and it should never be glossed over, it should be brought into the focus. We should break the silence on this. We should bring awareness. But what often happens is that often pastors do not have a go-to person or a go-to place for their own personal problems. They are the shepherds of the flock. They look after all the sheep. But at the end of the day, most pastors go home lonely people because they cannot put their trust in anyone, or they sometimes feel they can't put their trust in anyone. And sometimes they cannot befriend on a higher level, some of the congregation members, because they have to lead constantly, give direction, give vision. So I think what could help in the church sense is to bring awareness, to stop glossing over these important subjects such as gender-based violence and the fact that there are actually pastors across all denominations that are a part of the problem, and to bring to the fore maybe a structure that can minister to pastors themselves, where they feel they can also get help, because we forget they are people. They have things that they go through. And I think we have to be very sure when we say this, is that none of the things in gender-based violence, no violence in any form, no transgression against the dignity of any human being, I don't care which position what person holds, it can never be allowed and it can never be condoned. And we have to make a stand for that. So thank you. That's my answer, Lizette. As the representative from Golden Key, Southern Africa head office, I would love to thank our MC, Edith Masiova Tapfuma. You have done an exceptional job. We are so appreciative of your time and your service here today. Also, the presenters, thank you for your wonderful insight. Thank you very much to all the panelists and the attendees. You are so special to us. We want to walk this journey with you, and we invite you to our session on Monday, 6 September, which will commence also at 1 p.m. So spread the word, send that link around and get more people to join so that we can take back our peaceful society and so that we can assist those who's undergoing great distress. Let us keep them in our prayers. Thank you so much, everyone. You are welcome now to leave the session by clicking the leave button at the bottom right of your screen. Thank you. Goodbye.